The day dawned with a leaden sky over Ouagadougou. The warm breeze did nothing to alleviate the invisible weight that hung over the presidential palace. It was as if the earth itself had sensed that something profound and silent was about to happen. Inside, the corridors were emptier than usual. The doors were slightly ajar, but the guards' eyes seemed restless, as if they had already heard rumors their lips dared not speak. General Ibrahim Traoré, dressed in his traditional olive-green uniform, walked silently through the main hall. His steps echoed firmly, but his expression carried an unusual shadow. Something was not right, and he knew it before any document, before any meeting, before the word betrayal was whispered. Seated at the head of a long, dark wooden table, Traoré examined a report in his hands, but his eyes weren't truly reading. He knew that report by heart. What troubled him wasn't the data, but the signature at the bottom of the page, Amadou Diarra. That name, which for years had been synonymous with loyalty, strategy, and unwavering trust. Amadou was more than an advisor. He was almost a brother. They had stood side by side during the resistance, sharing bread, shelter, and silence during nights under enemy fire. It was Amadou who had warned him of the ambush that could have cost him his life in 2022. It was Amadou who had defended his name before the UN when everyone else hesitated. And now it was his name that appeared in the papers as the orchestrator of a shadowy deal with foreign forces. Traoré took a deep breath. He closed his eyes. The silence was thick. It was the kind of silence that precedes decisions that leave scars. He stood up slowly, leaving the papers on the table, and walked to the balcony overlooking the capital's center. Below, the people went about their routines, oblivious to the drama unfolding in the heart of power. He thought of the children running through the alleys of Bobo Dioulasso, the women rising at 4 a.m. to fetch water, the elders still telling stories of the mossy kings under the trees. "They trust me," he murmured, and I trusted him. That same morning, Amadou Diarra was summoned to the palace. He arrived in silence, his face serious, but not defeated. His eyes met Traoré's the moment he entered the office. For a second, time seemed to stop. No words were spoken, only the distant sound of a military radio playing a folk song. Traoré remained standing. Amadou hesitated, then approached. The tension was almost unbearable. There were no more masks between them, only the raw, naked, brutal truth. "Why?" was all Ibrahim said. Amadou swallowed hard. He didn't try to justify himself immediately. He sat down, took a deep breath, and in a low voice replied, "I thought I was protecting you, protecting the country. They promised support, technology, stability, and I thought I could control the situation without you knowing. But they didn't just want to negotiate, they wanted to dominate, and I stayed silent." The general watched him for long seconds. The pain was visible in his gaze. It wasn't just the pain of betrayal, but of disappointment. The pain of someone who had believed blindly and was wounded by the hands he thought were the safest. "You didn't just betray me, Amadou. You betrayed the people, and above all, you betrayed yourself." Traoré's voice was low, but cutting. Outside, the wind was picking up. The palm trees swayed as if reacting to the emotional turmoil building in that room. A guard entered to announce that the press was already waiting outside. There would be a statement. The people wanted to know why the second most powerful man in the country had been urgently summoned to the palace, and whether he would leave in handcuffs. But Traoré only nodded, dismissing the guard with a gesture. He turned to Amadou and said, "Today, the world will see something it doesn't understand. It will see that justice can walk hand in hand with forgiveness. But don't mistake forgiveness for weakness. I cannot erase what you did, but I can choose not to perpetuate the cycle of destruction." At that moment, a silent tear rolled down Amadou's face. It wasn't a tear of fear. It was one of regret. He didn't plead for mercy. He didn't kneel. He only lowered his eyes and murmured, "Thank you, Ibrahim, for still seeing me as a man." As evening fell, the people gathered in the central square to hear the president's address. The sun filtered golden light through the clouds, creating an almost liturgical atmosphere. The crowd watched in silence, attentive, many with teary eyes, sensing that something grand, though painful, was about to be revealed. Ibrahim Traoré stepped onto the platform. He wore white, a symbolic gesture. There were no flags, no armed soldiers, just the people, just him. With a firm voice, he began, "Today my heart was torn in two. A man who always walked by my side, in whom I entrusted my life, my family, my country, made decisions that put us in danger. And I, as a leader, should punish him with the rigor the law demands. But I choose to show the world that true power lies not in destroying, but in restoring. I forgive him, and he will face the consequences with dignity. For forgiveness does not absolve him of responsibility. It only frees him from hatred." The crowd fell silent for a few seconds. Then an elder in the front row raised his clenched fist in a sign of respect. Others followed. Within minutes, the entire square was filled with raised fists. It wasn't a political gesture. It was an ancestral one, of recognition, of courage, of a people who saw in that man not just a president, but a symbol of something greater. That night, the sky opened. It rained in Ouagadougou, but it wasn't just any rain. It was a rain that washed away the pain, the mistakes, and heralded a new time. In the early hours of that same morning, while the people still discussed the scene of forgiveness with eyes full of disbelief and respect, Ibrahim Traoré remained awake, sitting alone in his office. The rain beat on the roof like war drums repurposed into prayers. There were no more advisors around him, no cameras, just him, a lit lamp, and the memories of the past years dancing in his mind like shadows on the wall. He thought of everything he had already faced. External traitors were easy to identify. They had uniforms, weapons, flags. But the traitors of the heart, those came disguised as friends, and they were the ones who hurt the most. Ibrahim had always known that leading was walking a narrow path, but that night he understood that forgiving was like crossing an abyss, a gesture that might seem like madness to the world, but brought freedom to the soul. The sound of thunder broke his silence. It was as if the sky had shouted at him. "How you still have a people to care for, Ibrahim?" He stood up slowly, ran his hand over his face and walked to the small makeshift chapel inside the palace. A simple space with wooden benches and a cross carved by artisans from the north. There he knelt, not to ask for vengeance, not to demand justice, but to seek discernment. And in that solitary act, while everyone slept, Traoré renewed his pact with the truth. The next morning, Amadou Diarra was officially relieved of all his duties. But the way it happened left the nation stunned. There was no humiliating parade, no public condemnation. Traoré accompanied him to the door, and, hand in hand, he turned him over to the new Council of Justice, saying only, "He erred, but he is our brother. Let the judgment be fair and the soul free." The elders present at that scene would recount years later that they had never seen a head of state cry in public while bidding farewell to a man who had betrayed him. The following weeks were marked by silence and anticipation. Some said Traoré had lost control. Others believed he had achieved a spiritual greatness rarely seen in a modern leader. But no one remained indifferent. It was as if the entire country was digesting the gesture. And something began to change. Young people started gathering spontaneously in squares to discuss ethics, forgiveness, and power. In schools, teachers had students write essays about the value of starting over. Groups previously divided by ethnicity or ideology began to talk again, and in the Sunday sermons of the villages, Ibrahim's name started being mentioned alongside the ancient kings who ruled with wisdom and an open soul. Traoré, meanwhile, continued his routine with more introspection than before. He visited orphanages at night, walked without an escort through forgotten villages, sat with fishermen to hear their stories. He seemed to be seeking something beyond the office. As if, after the pain of betrayal, he had discovered a new mission, to heal the wounded heart of the nation itself. But as every light attracts shadows, not everyone was pleased. A foreign group, which had sealed obscure deals with Amadou in the name of international cooperation, began to stir. They felt threatened. They hadn't expected the scandal to be transformed into a symbol of unity, and even less that the man who should have been weakened would emerge stronger, more respected, more dangerous to their plans. Then the pressures began. Subtle economic blockades, disinformation campaigns, false invitations to international conferences with diplomatic traps. Ibrahim noticed, but he didn't respond with attacks. He responded with a gesture that disarmed even the most cynical international analysts. He announced an African conference on reconciliation and sovereignty, inviting sister nations to discuss how to heal historical wounds without foreign tutelage. The event was a milestone. Leaders from across Central Africa attended. At the end of the third day, Ibrahim delivered a speech that would be replayed for years on community radios. Betrayal is a pain that pierces the soul, but it is also an invitation to transformation. If we as African peoples continue to respond to violence with more violence, we will perpetuate the curse imposed on us by colonizers. But if we choose the path of forgiveness, not of omission, but of inner liberation, we will be truly free. I forgave a friend not out of weakness, but because I know what I carry, and I know where I want to lead this people. We have the right to bleed, but we also have the duty to heal. The audience stood. Rhythmic applause. Chants rose, flags were raised, and tears on many faces. That night, Ibrahim didn't sleep in the official hotel. He preferred the simple home of an elderly man in the city. They sat by the firelight, ate yam and dried fish, and the elder said to him, "You are not just a president, you are a bridge between what we were and what we can be." And Traoré, looking at the embers, replied, "But bridges also crack. I only hope I can bear the weight." Across the country, Amadou Diarra, now living in voluntary seclusion, watched everything in silence. He gave no interviews. He refused security. He spent his days in a public library, reading about leaders who fell and rose again. He wrote letters he never sent. He reread Traoré's words every day. Forgiveness does not absolve you of responsibility. It only frees you from hatred. In his most recent letter, he wrote, "Ibrahim, I carry my cross. But your gesture taught me that I can still be useful. If one day you need me, not as an advisor, but as a citizen, I will be here, without pretensions, only with gratitude." And then he folded the paper, placed it inside a Bible he had received as a child, and walked through the city streets like an ordinary man. And for the first time in a long time, he smiled. Months passed since the fall and the forgiveness. Time, that silent sculptor of the soul of peoples, had done its work. The dust of international headlines no longer swirled around the scandal. Amadou Diarra's name no longer sparked anger or resentment. He had become a symbol of something rare, the man who was forgiven and did not abuse mercy, the man who fell to his knees but did not corrupt the soil with pride. Ibrahim Traoré, meanwhile, became more than a head of state. He became a living myth, not for opulence, but for silence, for the way he looked into people's eyes, how he touched the poor, how he spoke slowly, as if each word carried the weight of a seed planted in the soul. No one knew for sure if he still suffered from the betrayal, but everyone knew he had turned the wound into strength, the disappointment into direction, and the name of a traitor into a living lesson in reconciliation. On the anniversary of the founding of the new republic, a symbolic ceremony was held in the Kaya Plain, where Traoré had given his first speeches years ago. The choice of location was not random. It was there that he had said before a hungry and weary crowd, "I don't promise glory, I promise to walk with you until the end." Now he returned in his usual simple clothes, but with a heart marked by all the battles, those won and those lost. By his side were young soldiers, tribal elders, widowed mothers, and children with eyes shining with hope. No luxury, just truth. A rustic stage had been set up under a baobab tree. Ibrahim stepped up calmly, looked at the cloudy sky and spoke. His voice was firm but serene, like someone who no longer needs to prove anything to anyone. "Today, I don't celebrate victories. I celebrate new beginnings, because it was in pain that I learned the value of justice, and it was in betrayal that I learned the value of forgiveness. Every scar I bear carries a name. Every callus on my feet carries the memory of a choice, and the hardest of them all was to forgive." He paused. A heavy silence fell over the crowd. Forgiving does not mean forgetting, but it means refusing to carry poison in your heart. And when I let go of Amadou's name from my clenched fist, I also let go of a weight that could have consumed me. Many thought this would weaken me, but today, here before you, I feel stronger than ever. His words echoed through the hills, and amid the crowd, a man with a grey beard and simple clothes watched from a distance. It was Amadou. He hadn't been invited. He didn't want a stage or recognition. He just wanted to see with his own eyes the fruit of the gesture that had set him free. A child ran past him, and without knowing who he was, looked into his eyes and said, "You have the same look as the president." Amadou smiled, crouched down, and replied, "Maybe because I once walked by his side." At that moment, A thunderclap tore through the sky. The rain began to fall, not as a destructive storm, but as a baptism. Thick, warm drops that washed faces, eyes, memories. And then something improbable happened. Ibrahim, still on the stage, spotted Amadou in the crowd. Their eyes met, and instead of tension, there was recognition. A nod of the head. Simple, profound, final. Without a word, Ibrahim stepped down from the stage and walked toward him. The crowd parted, but no one dared break the silence. Everyone knew they were witnessing a moment too big for headlines. Face to face, the two men stood for seconds that felt like an eternity. Traoré extended his hand. Amadou hesitated, then took it, firmly. Ibrahim spoke softly, just for him. "There's still time." And Amadou, with a trembling voice, replied, "There always is." They didn't cry. They didn't embrace. They didn't shout. They just stood there, hands clasped, with the rain blessing their heads. Two men marked by fire. Two paths that crossed in the abyss of disappointment and built a bridge back. The moved crowd began to clap slowly, then louder, until the entire field was filled with applause and shouts of joy, not for politics, but for humanity. That night, the starry sky appeared like a mantle of hope, and on the radio, an ancient song began to play. The song of the ancestors, speaking of men who err but choose to begin again. Because in the end, what makes a leader is not the absence of pain, it's what he does with it. And Ibrahim Traoré, the betrayed man, became the man who forgave, and for that he became eternal.